Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee meeting. This is Friday, March 24th at 10 a.m. And I'd like to call this meeting to order. Nice sunny day, which is something we are all grateful for in the Bay Area after the terrible Tuesday storms we've all been having. Andrea, can you please start with me?
Yes, Chair Walia.
Present.
Vice Chair Mekachuk.
Present.
Director Tyson.
Here.
And currently absent are Director Martinez-Beltran and Director Rennie, but we do have a quorum of the committee.
I'd like to open it for public comments on non-agenda items.
No hands raised online, Chair.
Andrea? Open the consent calendar item to approve minutes of the February 24th meeting. Any comments from staff or the committee?
No, I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Any public comment on that item? Can we have roll call?
Chair Walia.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mekachuk.
Aye.
Director Tyson.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. I'm at roll call vote. Thank you. Move on to the regular calendar. Item number 2, your report will be presented by CEO Kirish.
Thank you, Chair Walia, members of executive. Welcome to SVCE's office. This is our first executive committee meeting in this location. Just wonderful to see you guys again. We'll just keep it short. We have a lot of items on the agenda. The governor had a budget change proposal where concepts that are of concern to CCA community. One of the issues is around central procurement. He is proposing that state agency DWR undertake central procurement of offshore wind, and that offshore wind would then get allocated to all those coming in. Seems too broad to us, and it's not really limited just to offshore wind. It can be many other resources too. And we are concerned that policy issues such as these are being dealt with in a budget change proposal. There's another proposal in this, there are 2 other proposals of concern. One is a penalty structure that adds penalties in addition to penalties that the CPUC has. And a third item has to do with the CPUC's authority to order procurement. It broadens the authority of the CPUC to order load-serving entities. So we're concerned about it, and so we're working through CCA and our legislative staff on this. So we'll keep you updated. It's still early. There were hearings in the Senate Energy Committee yesterday and the day before. Concerns have been raised with others. Last week, I'm changing subjects now. If you have a question.
I do have a question. How big is SVCE relative to San Jose Clean Energy?
They're essentially about the same size.
So we would double our voice if we had an issue with, if we quote partnered up with San Jose Clean Energy.
It's a good question. It depends on how many legislators you're talking about. How many legislators we have in our territory and in San Jose's territory. We do have overlap, like Assemblymember Calra is overlapping with our district too. Mr. Berman also overlaps. So I think we are in very close touch with them, and I see Benna Chang entering the room. Be happy to answer.
I won't delay because we've got a legislative ad hoc committee at the end of the month, and I think that this is an issue that they'll be dealing with.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Last week, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District took some historic action. They have passed 2 rules, one of which, well, basically the rules are associated with banning appliances that emit nitrous oxides. So this is a public health and safety rule. So basically lessening NOx and particulate matter 2, and ozone creation. So we supported it. It's very much in line. The co-benefits of this rule are lowering CO2, methane actually in the atmosphere. So it's a co-benefit. We were very pleased to see that it passed, but as we talked about, it's now got real because the number of heat pump water heaters that will have to be placed starting in 2027 in our territory is going to be about close to 20,000 a year. SVCE has been assisting at the rate of about 200 a year.
Say 1% of that.
So we met with all your staff yesterday in a member agency working group. It was a kickoff meeting. We are going to be supporting all your efforts. We are going to do this together. It's not just going to be local government, it's going to be manufacturers, developers, retailers, labor. We all have to work together to get this transformation done effectively. So we will update you as we put resources in place. The board has already allocated $40 million in total to existing buildings. So Justin and Zoe and a whole bunch of people are working on this.
I had a question about that. The heat pump 2027 I understood completely. And then there was the second part was the furnace or home heating. It had 2 dates. It had 2024 for low NOx, 2027 or 8 or 9 for zero. And I thought, what qualifies as low NOx? I didn't know that.
I'll get back to you on that. I do know the furnaces actually are 2029 and 2031 for commercial.
Okay. 2020, but there was a 2024 date and for the low NOx, and
I will check on that and get back to you. Nothing else in my update, Chairman.
Thank you, Girish. The question will come up as we have talked before about all our cities have gone through it very difficult last week.
We are looking into that. PG&E supports this change, and the grid will get even more reliable than what it is today. We recognize that outages such as many of our customers had in the last few weeks of multiple days are really acceptable, better. And this whole grid has to be transformed. So PUC is looking into it. The state legislature is actually undertaking a couple of hearings around grid reliability, interconnection at the distribution level and at the transmission level. So there'll be plans that continue to be developed. From an SVCE standpoint, we are looking at what we can control, what we can influence, and there's not much we can control at scale at the distribution level. We can offer up, we can continue to increase our rebates on energy storage, but I'll bring back to you some ideas on how we can add to the discussion and how we can add to furthering grid reliability in the district.
Thank you. The influence is what I'm looking at, as you said.
And we're looking at what the best way to do that is. And so in the next month or two, as part of the upcoming budget, we'll allocate resources.
That'll be great, because the concern is with climate change phenomena that looks strange. People who have lived in their homes. It's not an odd one, it's an odd one today. My concern is will happen again and therefore. Thank you.
I had a whole mostly related but not the same subject since we're on the same. Twice yesterday I heard about the same concept. I saw Bruce Carney email about peat pruning. And then I went to our town's environmental initiatives committee and heard more about it. The whole concept being if there's 10 houses on a street and PG needs to replace the gas line, if they can get everybody to go all electric. The example I heard from Steve Schmidt was they paid each house $40,000. It was that much, that was the value of not having to replace, to just shut off the gas line. a huge incentive, and there's something about maps and how this can be modeled, and I think it's hugely interesting, and I've never heard of it before yesterday, and yesterday I heard it twice.
And just so you know, we have been looking at that. It is part of our plan. So two things. So gas system pruning is part of our decarbonization plan on the building side. So that's something that you've already given us the go ahead on. And now we are refining it. So Zoe and her team just did an existing building called a sprint, going into depth on what we can do. And this is one of, we have about 6 different pillars that we're going to be focusing on. And gas system pruning is one of them. Both working with PG&E on one hand, and there's some things we are looking at as to what we can do in terms of neighborhood electrification that may not need as much of PG. We're also in touch with PG&E on how we can partner with them to move this idea forward.
Fascinating.
We'll bring this back here.
Thank you. I open the public comment period for item number 2.
No hands raised, sure.
Thank you, Andrea. Moving on to item number. I have the staff report for the change to expand the executive committee.
Hey, everybody. Excuse me, good morning. Good to see everybody in person. And so as this item's title states, we are requesting for your consideration to expand this committee's membership to up to 6 board members. On this slide is a lot about the executive committee. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you are on the committee, you know exactly what we do here. But I did want to point out that the current membership of this group is 5 primary board members. And that is what we're looking to possibly amend. So our request is to amend this membership to create up to 6 members in this body because it allows an additional seat for somebody on our board to participate in this group. Also, our finance and administration and audit committees have up to 6 members, so it would create some consistency amongst our committees and allowing more board members to participate. Our operating rules and regulations consist of our policies and bylaws by which we follow, and within this document, it states that this body is made up of 5 members. So if you do choose to approve our recommendation, we would need to amend our operating rules and regulations, which is a multi-step process. One, we would bring a proposal at a regular board meeting, followed by an action at the next regular or a later regularly scheduled board meeting. And prior to bringing for adoption, we would need to notice the amendment to our board members at least 10 days prior in writing. Our proposed operating rules and regulations change, as you see here, highlighted in red, would be up to 6 board members. Currently, it says 5, so that would be the change that we are proposing within the language of that ORR. And next steps, should you choose to approve our recommendation, would be to bring this proposed amendment to our April Board of Directors meeting. And we would then agendize this item likely on consent in May for approval. And of course, we'd provide that written notice that's required 10 days prior. And we would also agendize an action item at our May board meeting to appoint a 6th member to this 2023 executive committee. Again, just rounding it out, the staff's recommendation is to propose amending our ORR to expand membership to 6 members.
Thank you, Andrea. Any questions?
After you take public comment, I would like to make a motion to move that recommendation.
Public comment?
I see none.
Andrea, your motion.
Move that we recommend staff's recommendation to the board.
Thank you.
I would like to second that.
Thank you. Vote, please, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Chair Walia?
Yes.
Vice Chair Makachuk?
Aye.
Tyson?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Andrea. We move on to item number 4. And COO, Director of Power Resources, Monica Padilla, the Senior Manager of Power Resources, is to authorize the CEO to negotiate and execute a power purchase agreement with Middle River Power for up to 100 megawatts of natural gas peaker plant, combined with 134 that battery energy storage system for 12 years. That's a long agenda item. It is. All right, we can go to the next slide.
What is the far right? I've seen that picture 3 times. It looks like one of our trees falling down. What is that thing?
The far
The
right
center, the
Center.
far right little pillar.
is that stack, isn't it?
Yeah, the jet from the coal plant stack.
The coal plant.
Doesn't it look
Falling
like it's-
down.
Doesn't it look like it's falling down?
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
It's the transition.
There's a story and I don't know the story.
Now let's see.
All right, okay, so the request today of the board or of the executive committee is to recommend to the board to delegate authority to the CEO to finalize negotiations and execute a power purchase agreement with Middle River Power for a project that we're calling the Hanford Hybrid Natural Gas Power Plant. Hybrid because it has a battery energy storage system that's going to be built at the site. And it's primarily to meet resource adequacy requirements, but also meets a portion of our midterm reliability procurement order requirements as directed by the California Public Utility Commission. We further ask that the executive committee recommend to the board approve an exception to the board approved energy risk management policy. And we'll talk a little bit about that to manage potentially the costs associated with the Hanford PPA. And lastly, to direct staff to develop a proposal to establish a fund and guidelines to mitigate the emissions associated with the Hanford. That's the basic acts. Just to recap, we've talked to the board and the executive committee on 3 different occasions about SVCE's clean energy goals. Difference between energy and capacity, our requirements for reliability and the challenges associated with reliability as we move to a clean grid for the whole entire state. And then more specifically, the California's Resource Adequacy Program and the challenges that we face with resource adequacy. So we're going to briefly touch on this stuff, but I understand we're a little bit limited for time, some of the background, but we'll try to jump to our actual set of solutions or alternatives and the recommendation on Middle River Power. Recap, this is, the grid is in transition. State has established a goal to be 100% carbon free by 2045. And that transition is going to require a whole bunch of new clean capacity and new technologies by 2045. So SVCE, along with many load serving entities in California, have already started that transition. Predominantly to meet renewable portfolio standard requirements, most recently to meet midterm procurement requirements as well. So there's quite a bit of work that still needs to get done before we get close to what we need to meet the clean capacity requirements, clean energy requirements. I think last when we met with the board in February, talked about what the role of natural gas is in meeting reliability. Most specifically, we highlighted this event that happens when we had the multi-day heat wave. So you can see that, again, natural gas plays a critical role in keeping the lights on. And in the graph there, you can see the green line at the very top. That is the role natural gas played on that day. Go to the next slide. I'm happy to stop and pause on any of these. We're trying to get through the background stuff. We also talked about contributions towards reliability from different types of technologies, the traditional technologies that we've had on the grid being natural gas and your geothermal as well, because it kind of aligns well with natural gas. These resources contribute a lot toward reliability on a megawatt per megawatt basis. As we move to a clean capacity, including solar, wind, and storage paired or not paired with storage, the capacity factors or the ability for these resources to meet reliability diminishes significantly depending on the hour of the day and the time of the year. That creates a reliability challenge that we're all kind of facing as we get to clean.
I like how you split these.
Well, these two, I do. I'm just speaking.
Y'all.
Thank you. Again, an overview of the resource adequacy program in California. Silicon Valley Clean Energy, as a load serving entity that's under the CPUC's jurisdiction, has to abide by the program that the CPUC has put in place.
And so the CPUC determines the obligations. And the CPUC also determines how effective each technology or type is, including renewable resources. And for SVCE, our annual requirement is about 850 megawatts. That coincides with our, which happens in August or September, probably about September. As I mentioned, or as we talked to the executive committee about last month, for 2023, we have a year ahead filing that we submitted at the end of 2022. In that filing, we showed that we were deficient and likely to face penalties. And we also talked about the reasons associated with that are the changes in obligation that the CPUC placed on us, changes on the effectiveness of the technologies that our portfolio, and then more importantly, the scarcity that we're seeing in the market right now. Next slide. We also talked to the board and the executive committee about, again, our clean portfolio is really intended to meet our energy needs. There's a difference again between energy and capacity. From a reliability standpoint, our clean portfolio doesn't contribute a whole lot towards reliability. And again, that's because the CPUC recognizes that they're not that effective in meeting reliability because they're only available as the fuel source is available. So we get quite a big haircut associated with our clean capacity portfolio. Next slide. Here's what I'm going to hand it over to Charles to talk specifically about the portfolio and the solution or alternative that we're bringing to.
Thanks, Monica. So SVC has a goal of meeting 100% of our energy needs from clean resources. So in the table here, we're showing our portfolio as it's been constructed, estimated for 2025. As you can see, our percent of total retail sales is primarily met with renewable resources like biomass, geothermal, solar, and wind. We also take an allocation from PG&E for the large hydro generation that's delivered to SVC customers. The thing to focus here is the clean resources that we've built or are building are not going to contribute a lot to RA requirements. And so things like solar and wind, while they meet a lot of our retail sales, they don't contribute a lot to reliability. It's just the shape of those profiles, it's the shape in which they contribute to the evening peak is not as significant as, say, natural gas or large hydroelectric. Battery storage is a major contributor to reliability. That makes up a large portion of our requirements, but we still have this minimum position to go out during the short-term market. That's been primarily met through natural gas. We'll move on to the next slide. And so the status quo for SVC is we have this robust portfolio of renewable projects under long-term contract to meet clean energy. Renewable and storage capacity effectiveness is expected to decrease over time, so that those efforts are going to diminish in terms of the reliability contribution. And so natural gas power plants are going to continue to serve some reliability need over the next 10 to 20 years. We're not quite sure when these power plants will retire, but we need to advance the efforts of clean procurement and things like battery storage to see that eventual retirement. But it's a kind of an open-ended question of when these will actually retire. So SVC has relied primarily on short-term natural gas for RA-only capacity contracts to meet our RA requirements. But the thing to focus on here is the market is tightening and costs are increasing. So trying to find these types of short-term contracts is much more difficult. So we have this need to adapt. So our strategy here is to think about layering in longer-term RA gas purchases to reduce sensitivities to price, supply, and compliance risk while still maintaining a transition to clean energy. And so we're thinking about these things as in motion. So 2023 has been difficult. We see the need. We want to make the transition. We need to think carefully about when all this will happen. Next slide. And so, the possible reliability solutions. As we transition to a clean grid, SVC must look at all the options for adequacy and reliability requirements. So clean alternatives, we can continue marching along with new storage, standalone, and paired with solar storage resources. There's also out-of-state wind. We pursue those efforts. We've also looked at new and or existing baseload renewables such as geothermal and biomass. Distributed energy resources and demand response, including virtual power plants. Those are efforts that we look at, though the scale in which those things are offered to us are not super large in terms of volume. There's also new technologies such as offshore wind. Those things are being contemplated, though we don't know when they will enter our portfolio, what the reliability contribution will really be. And so other alternatives for us to look at are longer term RE only capacity contracts, such as the natural gas contracts we currently sign. And also looking at now natural gas peaker power plants with or without hybridized battery energy storage systems. For those projects, for existing peaking facilities, we're not constructing anything new. We're just adding on batteries to help reduce emissions and bettering those projects at the site. Next slide. So this is sort of just to carve out all the different technology strategies, the challenges that face each one of them. The theme here is that each one of these technologies face a long lead time build risk and development. So, near-term reliability solutions with these types of technologies are going to be difficult in the near term, and so we need to think about the transition away from natural gas, but also building these things in a structured amount of time. Next slide. So introducing the Hanford hybrid natural gas power plant with battery energy storage system. This is our alternative strategy. So rather than looking at just clean solutions, let's look at a natural gas peaker and add on a battery. So this graphic really demonstrates to us that a battery system attached to a peaking gas unit can better compete with that resource at the project site because they're competing for the same transmission interconnect. So the battery will charge from the grid when emissions are low and help displace the evening peaking generation from the gas resource. Typically, these resources start up in the evening peak, as Monica showed in the September chart for September 2022. But the battery will effectively reduce the runtime of the peaker by taking at least 1 or 2 or 3 hours away from the peaking runtime. So the idea here is that they're at the same site, they're competing for the same transmission, they're going to economically displace each other. Or the battery will displace the peaker. Next slide, please. So the Hanford project, this is what's being offered to SVCE. So the project is an existing 99.4 megawatt peaking natural gas plant. It's being offered to us as an energy tool and RE capacity project. The new battery energy storage system is a 131.4 megawatt 1 hour battery system. So it's lithium ion, that is the technology. The RA contribution from the total project is 115.4 megawatts, and the breakout is shown there. Its midterm reliability procurement contribution is 16 megawatts, so it is a 1 hour battery. And when you divide that over 4, it equates to about 16 megawatts of incremental reliable capacity that we can count towards RA. So the important thing here to note is the energy toll. We'll be taking the energy from the total project. So dispatchable energy from the existing peaker plant will be used during mostly constrained market conditions for reliability and under limited operating constraints. And so the price that is being offered to us is broken out into 2 parts. It's RA capacity and energy toll. The expected cost of the project is $280 million. We expect that the commercial operation date will be April 2024. It'll have a term of 12 years, and the project is located in Fresno, California. On to the next slide. So looking at Hanford's portfolio impact, so we've seen this table now before. What is Hanford in terms of percent of total retail sales and its contribution? So it has a battery storage project attached to it. It increases our percent of total RA requirement on that specific technology by 2%. Hanford will, on average in a typical year, generate about 8 gigawatt hours of energy. So from SVC's perspective, in terms of total retail sales, that's only about 0.2%, where it meets 16% of our RA needs. So peaking generation is in many ways complementary to our portfolio. We're trying to meet clean needs. We're trying to reduce the amount of natural gas emissions. A natural gas baseload resource really wouldn't fit our portfolio. And a peaking generation resource is really intended for reliability. Therefore, it really does serve to meet SVC's goals at the end of the day. So only 0.2% towards retail sales, but 16% towards next slide, please. So just talking about environmental impacts, with an expected annual energy output, the resource will produce about 8,000 megawatt hours, or 0.2% of SVC's load. That equates to about 5,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions per year. And so the idea here is that the battery over time will reduce that runtime significantly throughout the term. And GHG emissions are expected to increase over time there as a result. And one of the things that we're considering is considering establishing a fund to mitigate impacts of that localized emissions. So fund details will be discussed with the board and other stakeholders at a further time, but that is kind of the direction of this project where we're at. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it back to Monica to talk about year-end policies.
Yeah, and feel free to. So the board adopts an energy risk management policy and reviews it every 2 years. One of the aspects of the energy risk management policy is a set of approved transactions. These are the types of transactions that we as staff, the CEO is authorized to enter into without having to go back to the board. A tolling agreement is one of those types of products that the board has pre-approved, but it wasn't specific with respect to approving a gas tolling agreement. So when we ultimately take this proposal to the board, as the executive committee supports it, we will ask for permission to essentially approve a gas toll that'll be approved by the board. Additionally, the energy risk management policy does not contemplate buying natural gas either on a spot term basis, short-term basis, or on a forward basis, since we're an electric load-serving entity. But if we did want to manage the gas costs associated with the Hanford PPA, we'll need an exception to the policy to allow under this particular PPA only the ability to buy gas. So that's the other exception, or that's the one exception we'll ask the board to approve. Slide. So just to kind of summarize what Charles has already said, the Hanford hybrid natural gas power plant with storage, we believe is a sustainable and affordable strategy to meet reliability long-term and to help us transition to a clean grid. The Hanford PPA is primarily being sought for resource adequacy. But it does include this battery energy storage system, which would help us meet reliability procurement or requirements as well. And while we are a clean CCA and we're certainly supportive of getting to 100%, we need these types of products or projects to help us transition over time. We believe that the addition of the battery energy storage system will reduce emissions over time, hopefully at some point to zero when the project becomes battery stands alone. The project itself has very limited development risk. Existing project with the battery is new, so there'll be some tracking of that part of the project. And then while this project was offered to us on an unsolicited basis, but we haven't kind of in the background, we have RFOs or requests for offers for clean technologies, so clean capacity, clean resources. And this project, we did compare it to some of the other offers we saw in our solicitations. It does fairly well from a price and a portfolio value standpoint. So that's essentially the reasons that we're bringing the solution to the executive committee, ultimately to the board. For the next slide for this request. I'm not going to read through this, but it's basically to give the CEO the authority to finalize negotiations with Middle River Power with these parameters to approve the exception to the energy risk management policy mentioned. And then again, this last point, to direct staff to develop a policy and or guidelines to set aside some funds to mitigate some of the emissions associated with the project. And so this is something that certainly we want some feedback on. If you have any, it would be something that we would develop over time. That's the request in action.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Charles, for your report. Every time I feel there are so many pieces that are being juggled to go towards meeting our clean energy goals long-term and at the same time meeting the state requirements. As Charles just mentioned, maybe 0.2% of our retail sales, but really 16% of our needs. The complexities, I want to thank and your team for constantly keeping on top of it. Long-term, short-term, juggling so many variables, very impressive. Andrea, can the record please reflect Martinez. I'm still working on my coffees. Thank you. Question, please.
Oh, thank you for the presentation. Every time I see it, it becomes a little clearer to me. I understand we're under research. You know, if I step back and I think, idealistically, what do I think we'd be working on? It'd be clean energy all the time. And so this whole natural gas thing is a thing to sort of get over. But then I didn't know about resource adequacy when I got started in this too. Okay, and some of the things I heard in your message, that last slide was really good in terms of the economics and the thing it fills in for us. I liked also that was put in there, and I think it's important, is about sharing the transmission having capabilities, because having read the grid recently, I'm more aware of that as being a further constraint we don't always think about for new things like this. So I would say what struck me is the emissions will be lower than just a comparable natural gas thing. And a parallel occurred to me during the presentation about resource adequacy, and see if this works for you in the wake of our banking thing. Banks have to have an allowance for bad debts. They have to set aside things in case bad things happen. But if you manage things well, you can do better than that. My question for you is, we take a haircut. I can see you trying to figure out where I'm going. We take a haircut on resource adequacy of our mix. I'm guessing it's a little bit conservative. What's the chance that what you've projected will actually be less, because we're going to do better in bad debts and in actual energy through clean sources, that we won't have to run the natural gas as much as we think?
Time will tell. It depends on what market prices are. Right. So if we have the kind of prices we've had the last months or so, it's probably going to run. And the recommendation is assuming it's running about 25% of its allowed time. So it can run only 2,000 hours a year, which is 25% a year. We are assuming 25% of that is what we think it will run.
So I don't think it's a pricing thing. It's the resource adequacy is a mixture of things. And so I'm always thinking about hydroelectric. So if we get more hydroelectric, then we will have less of a need for these things. So I think we might be better.
As a grid in
overall
total,
grid in total.
yeah, if you remember the slide that Charles showed, even though we get a large allocation of large hydro from PG&E, and then we go out in the market and buy additional large hydro, we get no resource adequacy capacity associated with that. The grid will.
The grid will.
The grid will.
Yeah, all right.
And so that reduces the emissions for the whole entire grid, right? But we have, as an LSC, have an obligation to show our own share of that capacity.
Okay.
Fundamentally, gas units plan to be shut down. And we don't have enough of the other stuff, solar, wind, storage, coming in fast enough. And the other thing that's happened is the very load that we had in California is changing. What we predicted load to be 5 years ago in terms of variability because of climate change is seeing the volatility of load, so to speak, being even higher. And so what regulators and the California Independent System Operator do is they've changed what's known as the planning reserve margin, which is the reserves we hold in place to meet these heat wave
Swings.
these swings. But that's going up too. So a combination of load increases and the reserve margins also going up.
My final comment or question, I guess, is if we could highlight, I think this whole natural gas procurement is still kind of a big deal for us. That last bullet point you had there about finding ways to offset, I'm kind of suspicious of these whole offset things. My Rotary Club promises to plant 20 trees for every speaker that we get. I scratch my head. That looks like a BS project to me. Say that to anybody except for you. So I'm just going to say, if you could stress that, and if we could get us back to natural, emissions zero some way or another, even if it's kind of like that my tree planting, I think that'd be better.
Yeah, We hadn't necessarily contemplated a carbon offset type program. It was more like, what are some ideas, kind of like what we did with Diablo Canyon Power Plant. We decided to take the allocation from PG&E. The board expressed some concerns and we developed a program where we set aside the dollars that we save by avoiding to have that, buy that carbon-free energy, allocated towards programs
Yes.
in our community.
Could be reinvested in our community, potentially also in the county where this plant is. I've just looked up the cost of the cap and trade auction price for carbon.
Yes.
Ton of carbon is $27.
Metric ton.
Yeah, right now. So at 5,000 metric tons, it's about $150,000 a year. But something like that, set aside about $150,000 a year. And then the board would decide how are you going to utilize that for maybe local projects here
Okay, to promote
there.
electrification or something like that.
correctly.
All right,
Exactly,
good.
yeah,
Good, you got
something like
I have a number of comments and questions, clarification points. So the whole resource adequacy is new, and it's primarily a result of what happened in September 2022. Is that correct? No,
No, it's been around.
or
since-
the ratcheting up of it, the increased.
Well, the resource adequacy program has existed in California since the late 90s. Energy reliability issues back then. It continues to morph over time. And so some of the rules, the county rules have changed, they change all the time. We're actually in the process of a major reform to resource adequacy that'll take place over the next couple of years with the full implementation in 2025. But so resource adequacy has always been, or at least in the last couple of decades. The challenges that we face, like Rich said, is climate change is changing load and the volatility, electrification, and all the renewables that we're bringing on are changing when resources are available. And so that's kind of the crisis, not necessarily the crisis, but that's the challenge we face ourselves, is that.
That's the
change is
catalyst.
low. That's the catalyst, right?
Okay. But at the end of the day, with our changes in our portfolio and having this natural gas peaker plant, if you will, on board, will help reduce the problem that occurred in September 2022. Is that correct?
So that exactly,
That's
and help us meet our obligation.
right. Okay, that's, and the other thing that we're facing is we've talked about a penalty. And this will reduce the penalty that we're facing,
Well,
the potential penalty.
yes,
So I think that's a super important point. Fundamentally, what we've been doing, but let me step back. Natural gas plants are needed to keep the lights on. It's a fact. It has to be on in California. This RA program essentially says all you load serving entities, and there are about close to about 50 in California, have to buy a portion of all this capacity, so you have enough. We at SVCE have essentially been doing it on a short-term basis. We've been buying this capacity on 1 year at a time, sometimes by 2 years. So this idea, because we're gonna have these gas units on anyway, that is not gonna change for the next 20 years. It'll reduce, but we're still gonna depend on it. It's a portfolio diversification. It's kind of like, let's take a portion of this gas capacity that we're going to buy anyway and buy it for a longer period of time. Charles has been out in these last few months putting out RFOs for RA, and in some cases getting 0 responses. There's no capacity available. So it gets to your point that the chances of reducing or avoiding penalties goes up if you have a portion of your portfolio in place for a longer period of time.
I think that's a key point to make. Are any other Are any other CCAs buying natural gas peakers like we are now?
Essentially, a mirror of this deal was entered into by East Bay Clean Energy last a month or two.
I think that's an important point, that we're not blazing a trail here, that we're at the front end, but we're not.
And Marin, MCE Clean Energy, I believe, has also done something similar for hybridized energy storage with the gas plant.
And so has San Jose Clean Energy. So San Jose Clean Energy took the sister project associated, or took a project, and then East Bay is considering the sister project for renewable power. Marine Clean Energy, I think it comes last month that they signed a contract. So this capacity is being removed from the market. If we continue on our current strategy, as Chris mentioned, we're just doing this on a short-term basis. This is all capacity that's no longer available to us. So we need to get in the queue as well.
Another good point.
I think that makes it more understandable for the board and more, for lack of a better term, palatable.
Thank you. We will, just change some of the structure.
And then I've got some other comments, but we can deal with that offline.
Yeah, well, I have a couple comments. One is, you always need a transition plan, and I'd like for us to kind of coin the idea that that we are setting up a transition plan. So we identify it, we own it, and then we can identify the different projects as transition plan projects. And then this way we're able to look at them, manage them, see how efficient they are, and how kind of measure how close we're getting to maybe weaning off of that. So that's just one thing that I'm thinking about, so we can look at what that impact is. And maybe, you're talking about other CCAs are getting involved in this as well. It would be great if we had one of these projects that had all CCAs in it, realizing that everybody's working to get towards clean energy, but that's kind of not really here. So I think what I would like to know is, do we plan after 12 years, like what is the shift? Will we shift to a better form of energy? Are we identifying this as something that ends at 12 years? What does that look like?
The state, the two things. The California Air Resources Board is the mothership in California on air quality. They have a plan on how to get to lower emissions. The CPUC, which determines what happens to the electricity sector, has a plan to get to net zero or carbon neutral by the year 2045. So that's 2045, so that's 22 years from now. And it's net zero. And net zero means, it doesn't mean there won't be carbon. There will be carbon. You cannot run our economy without carbon emitting resources. Those technologies have not been developed yet. So when we say net zero, there's a big chunk of emissions which will have to be captured and sequestered. And that's what the California Air Resources Board plan is. Close to about 35%, 40% of California state's emissions are going to have to be sequestered. So Yvonne, these plants may continue to run, but the carbon will be captured in some way. That's the plan. So your question, it's
So there's an increase in capturing that carbon that does not exist today.
correct. That's what, at the same time, the gas plants that we have in California, the State Water Resources Control Board and the CPUC have plans on shutting down these gas plants. But yes, they are going to be shut down, but the projections we've seen for even 20 years from now still shows some of them are going to be around.
Okay, so I guess my question is, are we going to be around with them all that time? Or in 12 years when this ends, are we going to have more sources of clean energy that we're going to be able to tap into and bring on board?
Yeah,
We will.
we'll have more clean energy. It doesn't mean that we won't be relying on natural gas to meet our resource adequacy requirements after 12.
Okay, so I guess going back to the whole coining and identifying which projects are our transition projects, so that we can say, today, we're using 40% or whatever it is to, we're leaning on this peaker plant. And in 12 years, we look to be leaning on that at 20%, whatever the number is. But I think that would be something that would be very helpful.
So, yes, the answer to your question is yes. We will depend more on clean resources and less on natural gas.
Okay.
But just going to your question, so we will identify that. It's just that in 12 years, it'll be less. It's not going to go away.
Okay. If we had a goal, that would be great, that we're looking to attain of, we want to be less, dependent by this
So
much or whatever.
We will provide that. I doubt we'll be able to provide you a specific number. Because frankly, this is what the PUC and all of us have to do through our integrated resource plan.
Okay,
So the integrated resource plan looks out 10 years and says, where is your energy coming from and where is your capacity coming from? They're optimizing for lowering GHG emissions, which is what you're focusing on. At the same time, they're balancing out reliability because they have to keep the system reliable. So those slides which Brian referred to, say like slide 16, is energy and capacity, right? So this gas plant contributes 0.2%
right,
to our energy, but 16% of capacity.
right,
And your point is, well, what's that going to look like 12 years from now?
right.
Yeah, so we'll definitely
I
provide
think
some
it'll
very
be part of the
statements.
next integrated resource plan,
Right.
which we're gonna kick off pretty soon.
Okay,
So the
And just
numbers will come in
calming it
later,
down.
but we will provide some very strong statements
okay.
around reducing our dependence on natural gas.
I just think it would help us as a board, because you guys are in this every single day, right? The integrated resource planning, you've got all that. But for us to look at this a little more high level and understand this project is getting us here. This is how much less reliant we want to be on with this particular project. And then my second question is about the battery storage. So I understand we're getting 2% here, but we're getting 16%, which is really valuable. Also with the battery storage, are we continuing to find battery storage in other sources that we're also not dependent on that for our continued battery storage?
We're doing that both as we want to for our portfolio, because it adds value, but also because we're mandated. Right? So these midterm reliability procurement orders, for the most part, end up being orders to add a whole lot of storage. So we are currently in a solicitation process right now and evaluating offers, and will likely bring something to the board probably in the next 2 or 3 months. That'll be some storage capacity, additional storage capacity.
This is great. And that last, where you call it out, I mean, it's fantastic. It's so helpful.
Those are
Thank you.
Let me open the public comment period.
No hands raised, Chair.
Was the public comment period, and I think the discussion we have had here is very helpful for the committee and staff to take it to the board. And the next item also is looking at the power purchase agreement, different. We are looking at. Yeah. So I was just going to say, a lot of this discussion would be helpful there to
Yeah.
move on from this item. Again, thank you, staff, for looking long-term, short-term, all the pieces. That's essentially what we're discussing. Questions? Motion, please.
I move that we recommend to the Board of Directors the item number 4 on that slide.
And a second. Let's have a vote.
Chair Walia?
Yes.
Vice Chair Makachuk?
Aye.
Dr. Tyson?
Yes.
Dr. Fun?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5. And once again, we have
It's actually going to be senior.
Manager of Power Resources, Charles.
Manager Charles.
Oh, do you want to introduce?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
You can talk about the details of the project.
Sure. So we'll try to go through these slides quickly. I know we're short for time. So we want to introduce a new PPA. It's called Rio Bravo Fresno. It's a biomass resource in the Fresno area. This is an existing project. It's not a new project. We found this project via the broker market. We were looking for short-term RECs, and this project was made available to us. So it's not a long-term PPA, it's a short-term PPA. It's about 2.75 years contract, but we'll go ahead and show you the details here. So we're recommending the board delegate authority to the CEO to execute a short-term power purchase agreement with Rio Bravo Fresno, the biomass energy resource, with the following parameters. The total nameplate of the project is 25 megawatts. It's estimated to generate about 175,000 megawatt hours a year. It'll be priced to us as a fixed dollar per megawatt hour project. As I mentioned, the term is 2.75 years. It'll begin in May 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2025. And the not to exceed dollar amount that we're requesting is $60 million. So what Rio Bravo does for SVCE is it helps us meet our renewable portfolio standard and resource adequacy requirements for calendar years 23, 24, and 25. So Rio Bravo Fresno is not a enabled counterparty with SVCE. Therefore, we need to go through board approval and delegate authority to CEO to negotiate and purchase this project. The next slide, please. So a little bit more about Rio Bravo Fresno. As I mentioned, it's a 25 megawatt resource. Annual gen is about 175,000 megawatt hours. The contribution to our renewable portfolio standard is about 4 to 5% per year. That's measured against total annual retail sale or retail demand. So its resource adequacy effectiveness is 25 megawatts. In the 24-hour slice array, the new regime of array, it'll be very effective because it generates 24 hours a day. So Rio Bravo Fresno is located in California's agricultural region, the community of Malaga. It was actually built in 1988. So it is an existing project. It's actually fairly old, but it's still available and still online. The fuel source is agricultural prunings and urban wood. So the technology used to burn that fuel source is a circulating fluidized bed boiler technology, which allows for a more complete and efficient burn of the biomass, thus air pollutants are drastically reduced. These agricultural prunings and urban wood, they used to just be sort of burned at the site or placed in landfills. So really not an efficient use of those fuel sources. The emissions factor for this project is 0.04 metric tons of megawatt hours per megawatt hour, which equates to about 1 pound of emissions on SVC's power content. Very low emitting project, but it does count towards emissions on our power content. Next slide, please. So the requests and next steps are to recommend to the board to delegate authority to the CEO to execute a short-term power purchase agreement with Rio Bravo Fresno with the following parameters. The next steps are to seek a board approval on April 12th, 2023. We'll finalize and execute the PPA after that, and then provide a fully executed PPA to the board after. Any questions on the project?
Thank you, Charles. That's a good report. Once again, reminding us how we have to constantly be looking at something which is already available to us. And you answered my question, which was, how are we making sure May 1st? Well, the project has been there since 1988, which is great. And I really like what I'm reading there. It's an efficient burn of biomass that is already there. So this is, in my mind, a key where we are looking at it from all possible angles, long-term goals, short-term goals, meeting our state requirements, CARB, CPUC, and so on and so forth. I don't have a question. Any questions, George, please?
All right, this might be a hard one. The capacity is 25 megawatts. If they ran at a 90% operating factor, that's 8,000 hours a year, be 200,000 megawatt hours. So they're running around 90% of that. Is there a seasonality to this? Does this actually produce power when we want it, or is this? I'm just picturing the source of the wood might not be available during times where we really need them.
Yeah, with biomass, fuel stock is kind of a concern, making sure that there's enough, because it's not something that you go out and produce. It's wood that you gather from the environment. So with this project, they're going to put to us a certain amount of generation that they should expect. If they don't meet that standard, then there are things in the contract that would penalize them for that. So there is incentives built in to make sure that they hit the standards. There are some planned outages that the resource has, and they're not going to generate every hour of the year. There's going to be a planned schedule. I think they go out for about 3 weeks over 2 months. Yeah. So that's why it's not 25 times 8760. It's like there is a little bit of ambient D rate throughout the day, just as it is over facility, but in the 175,000 megawatt hour estimate should hold.
The fact that the project's been in place since 1988, we're confident they understand the operations.
Thank you.
Great question, thanks. And I was just thinking historically, we can have a little more confidence that they have been meeting whatever they're talking about. Other questions?
Yes, so it runs 7/24 other than scheduled outages.
That's right.
Okay. In the CFD, I think in my past, I remember that from coal plants, Horizon food bed technology. Am I remembering correctly?
That was that is
Yeah.
their means of burning.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Open the public comment period.
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, close the public comment period, bring it back to the committee. You want?
Move to approve. Number five, thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Vote please, Andrea.
Yes, Chair Walia,
Yes, please.
Vice Chair Makachuk,
Aye.
Director Tyson.
Yes.
Director Martinez-Beltran.
Aye.
Thank you, that motion carried. Any absent?
Thank you so much. Moving on to item number 6, which is electrification discount design update. And I believe for this, we have Energy Services lead Peter, Director of Peter. I'm not even going to try. My apologies. Your last, you have to help me. From Energy Services and Community Relations. I don't know. After both. Here is Peter.
Hey, good morning. It's must-a-stitch and everybody struggles with it, so
Thank you.
no problem at all. I apologize I can't be there in person this morning, but it's great to see all of you together in one room, and I look forward to joining in the future. So we are going to have a discussion today, really looking for kind of your feedback and input on an update to an electrification discount. Next slide, please. We'll kind of go into some of the background about the electrification discount, then we'll go through some of the design thinking and a process that we've gone through in the past couple of months, and then we'll kind of summarize it with our staff recommendation and open it up for your feedback. Next slide, please. A little background first. So today we're talking about the electrification discount, which is a custom discount that the board approved in December of last year. So we did something a little bit different. We got approval for $9.5 million to pre-fund a discount, which will last several years, which applies specifically to the ELEC home electrification rate. This is a new rate that was introduced on December 1st of last year by PG&E, which is really designed to assist with affordable on-bill impact of electrification. And so it's something that we really want to kind of get behind in alignment with our efforts. And so the board approved this pre-funded discount, which has been set as of January 1st of this year at a 10% discount. But at the time of recommending this discount to the board, we did mention that it was staff's intention to kind of return to the discount structure and try to do something a little more intentional with the design of this discount to really kind of promote decarbonization as much as possible. And so that's really kind of what we'll be focusing on today. I do want to just note that we're fully aware that a discount like this really benefits single-family homeowners who can afford to voluntarily electrify. And so, to promote equitable access to electrification for those who would be less likely to access a discount like this, we also, in parallel in December, recommended and were approved by the board to set aside an equal $9.5 million to go into the multifamily direct install program, which SVCE is working on designing. And we did also create a kind of an off-ramp so that money that was not used by this electrification discount could also be funneled into that direct install program. I will point out one last thing about the electric home or e-elect discount. I do want to highlight it is open to any customer. It's a voluntary rate that a customer can choose, and to qualify, you either have to have a heat pump water heater, an EV, or an energy storage device, but it is currently not available to NEM customers, solar customers. PG&E will be revisiting kind of NEM eligibility later this year. But for now, we're talking about kind of electrification assistance to existing homeowners without solar. Next slide, please. So really the motivation behind this was to try to do something on the bill side. We have these amazing programs that support with electrification project costs. So I try to bring down the project cost side, but we wanted to do something in parallel that would help with the ongoing operating costs of home electrification. But we feel like we have the opportunity to take it a step further by not just making electrification cheaper, but by really encouraging what we call beneficial electrification. And so what we mean by this is reducing customer energy bills even further, reducing grid stress by encouraging more off-peak energy usage. So definitely some of the themes that we touched on in the RA discussion. And in doing so, better aligning electricity usage with renewable generation. Next slide. And so just kind of a little evolution of how we've gotten to today. So in December, the board approved the e-elect discount. On January 1st of this year, a 10% flat discount was put in place for SVCE customers who enroll in this new e-elect discount. We'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about what we mean by flat discount. In the past several months, we've been working on kind of design iterations. We've had 2 deep dives with a group of staff internally at SVCE for feedback and kind of iteration. Today, we're bringing this design recommendation to you for discussion, and it's our intention to bring it to the board in April. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll get a little bit more into some of the discount design evolution and analysis. Next slide, please. So we have looked at this point 4 different kind of design approaches, including the current, what we call the flat 10% discount. And really all of these are based around time of use or TOU period. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see what the TOU structure looks like for any given day on the e-elect rate. So there's an off-peak period from midnight to 3 p.m., which is the cheapest energy. So price per kilowatt hour throughout the day. 3 to 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. to midnight is this partial peak period, kind of intermediate pricing. And then 4 to 9 p.m. we have the peak period with the most expensive energy. So the way our flat discount is set up, a customer gets 10% off the cost of their electricity, no matter when they use it. So it's kind of regardless of peak or off peak. And as we know, a 10% discount on a more expensive commodity is a larger discount amount, right? 10% off of $100 is more of a discount than 10% off of $10. And so in a way, kind of a flat 10% discount provides a larger discount amount the more peak energy is used, since it's more expensive. And we really want to encourage as much off-peak usage as possible, especially as electrification increases. So we started looking at what happens if we shift the discount to the off-peak period. So we went through a couple of iterations. The second, what we called the TOU standard, we put all of the discount off peak and just did no discount for the other periods. But then we actually started exploring what happens if we play with this a little bit more, and we actually slightly increase the cost of peak electricity so that we can even more deeply discount off peak. And so we started with option 3, the TOU plus, and then we had our first internal staff review meeting, and we kind of came out of that with the direction of like, let's explore pushing this even further. So we then came back with the TOU super. And so if you go to the next slide, we can put some numbers to this. So here we see the discount. So the negative indicates a savings. So our price is below PG&E's price during each of these different periods. So the flat 10% discount, as you would expect, is 10% lower than PG&E's generation cost, regardless of TOU period or time of year. When we look at the TOU standard, as I mentioned, we zero out the discount for peak and partial peak and just put everything off peak. When we get into TOU plus and TOU super, we actually start looking at slightly increasing peak price so that we can even more deeply discount off peak.
Peter, can you hold that thought, please, just for a second?
I have a question. Are these all revenue equivalent for us? Are these percents mean that they're, for us, it's all the same?
They end up being about revenue equivalent. Yeah, when we look at an average customer.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah,
Please.
great question.
Thank you. Please carry on.
Okay. And so to that point, to really understand what impact these have, we took a deep dive into customer usage data to understand how do our customers actually use energy, because that's really going to be the determining factor in whether someone ends up saving money on these rates or whether it ends up penalizing them. So go to the next slide, please. So based on that, we looked at usage of all residential customers, and we came up with 3 different energy usage profiles to run through these different discount designs. And so we ended up, you can see in the pie chart, the amount of off-peak electricity used throughout the year. So the average customer, which represents about 90% of our customers, use about 55% of their annual electricity is off-peak, with about 25% being peak electricity usage. And then we also looked at kind of the bookends. So the 5% of customers who were using the most off-peak energy and the least peak energy, and also the 5% on the other end who are using the most peak electricity throughout the year and the least off-peak. And so we ran these through the 4 different design scenarios to really understand what does the bill impact look like. So next slide, please.
Peter, can you stay on that slide?
Oh,
just
yeah,
for a second?
absolutely.
We have another question, Brian.
Yes.
So when I look at these 3 customers, and maybe it's just me, but when I think of my friend group, if you will, there are people that say, I'm considering an electric car. And those people, how does this impact them? And an EV owner I don't see in these 3 groups here. Can you talk about that? And my hypothesis is that we need to appeal to people to move to EVs. So there you go.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a whole separate thing. When I walk in the late afternoon or evening and it's 70 or 60 degrees out, I hear people's air conditioning running. I think, damn it, what's going on here? People are paying no attention whatsoever. And I'm one of those people. I set my timer, I turn on the dishwasher at 9:02. But when I look at my bill, there's something like 2 or 3 cents difference, less than 10% between my peak and my off-peak rate. So I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I'm not doing it for financial reasons, really.
I think Peter and Nancy address your question. They both two issues that will be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions and really kind of get to the heart of what we're trying to do, right? We want to reward the people who are setting a timer and running the dishwasher later, you know, rather than, I mean, it's great that you're doing that. And I appreciate it. And I try to do similar, but we really want to, you know, focus our discount. We want to reward and encourage that kind of behavior. And same goes for EV. And so really, when we looked at the analysis of usage, I will say owners of EVs, just because EVs inherently are set up with a lot of controllability around when you charge, and they have a lot of flexibility in terms of, you know, it's different than say when you turn on your induction stove. You need to cook at a certain time for dinner, but induction is a much lower load compared to an EV. So EV is a more shiftable load. So EV owners tend to fall towards this savvy customer. So they would benefit greatly. I would think they would be very attracted by a TOU type discount.
Thank you, Peter. And I think it takes us back to the idea that your team, Girish, is constantly looking from a program perspective, different customer profile, and besides just the heavy industry understanding, the technical parts of power and the financial parts I see over there, and also the human behavior, really, how each one of us, there are people like George who will be careful. It's not the financial incentive, but the larger goal of emission reduction and how we minimize that. Take another quick question so that Peter can forward.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, you know, I'm looking at the ratios here at 5% savvy and 5% heavy peaker, but 90% is the average customer, which I think I absolutely fall. A household with a bunch of kids, you know, people are up all hours of the night, literally, whether it's me working or my husband working, and, you know, they come home, very hard to figure out, you know, it's not the same all the time. So programming is not going to necessarily, you know, work if you're a renter and you're living in a space, which I do, that you don't own, and you're kind of at the mercy of whoever the landlord is, you know, and that's a whole nother story, because you're talking about appliances that maybe are not energy efficient, or windows that haven't been, you know, upgraded, or whatever the instance is. And even looking at EV, I mean, I think we're looking at a discount here for power, but that's a much bigger, you know, conversation that has to have Sacramento and everybody else to get the infrastructure there so that people know where they can stop and where they can charge before you're going to get anybody to change their behaviors. So I think looking at this, and I think you guys have done a really good job already thinking about, you know, how are people really living and what's really happening, where we're rewarding. You know, if you've got people who are able to financially do that and already adjust, and then looking at people who maybe don't have the wherewithal to do that, and that's going to be a really large sector, right? So how are we going to motivate them to save energy with the small tools that they may have if they're not able to make these big, you know, adjustments at home or things like that? And so I think that's where you really have to try and encourage the behavior, knowing that some of that you're just not going to be able to change because people are living, right?
So thank you for that. I think Peter should continue with his presentation. That question is exactly what they're trying to address here.
Yes.
That's the way I'm looking at it, by giving financial incentive to that 90%, where they don't have control over all the specifics of the building.
Right.
And I think staff is doing a great job. So Peter, please carry on with the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, great question. And it really gets to the balance that we're trying to strike in this design, right? We want the average customer to benefit. We don't want to penalize the heavy peaker so that they actually end up paying more money than they would with PG&E, but we really want to encourage the savvy usage. So if we go to the next slide, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. I'll show the kind of results of these. So now we look at the 3 different customer types, and we're seeing the annual dollars saved. So this is the SVCE discount that each of these customers gets. And for each customer usage type, we look at the 4 different discount design approaches. And so there's kind of 3 real takeaways that I want to underline out of these results that we're seeing. And the first is that when we look at the heavy peaker, and I will note that all 3 of these customers use the same kilowatt hours per year. They just use the energy at different times. So when we look at the heavy peaker who uses the most peak energy, they don't go negative on the TOU super. So even with the increased peak price, they still end up with a 3 to 5% on average discount relative to PG&E. And as a reminder, our current discount across all of their rates is 4%. So they still end up okay. In fact, only 8 out of all 240,000 res customers, only 8 customers, when we ran this analysis, would end up going negative to any degree. So it's very, very unlikely that someone would lose money with the TOU super structure. So the second point is that the average customer on this TOU super ends up at 10%, just like they would today. So they get a great discount just based on the way that they're using energy without any changes. But when we look at the savvy customer in the middle, it really creates an opportunity to kind of like choose your own discount adventure, right? The average customer could almost double their discount through programming devices and through behavior modification. Yes.
I have a short memory. TOU super, which one is that? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
That was 4. So that's the 10% increase on peak price, and then the 30% discount on off peak.
That's to incentivize people to behave like the
No,
example
I
George is
get it. I
setting.
just couldn't remember which one it was. That's all.
Yeah, totally.
Like George, but and get the benefit of it at the same time, to shift people to behavior. Okay,
Great. And so really to kind of take this home and tie it into what a customer journey would look like, kind of the story that we want to tell as we think about how can we use kind of creative rate and discount design to complement and uplift the customer electrification journey. Next slide, please. This is kind of walking this average customer through home electrification in a couple of different steps. So here we have the average customer in a mixed fuel home, so single family home. They pay about, on average, $270 a month for gas and electricity. As we take them to the next step, they go through future fit homes. They retrofit their water heater to a heat pump water heater. Even by staying on the TOUC rate, we predict that they'll end up saving about $6 a month because of gas prices with their new heat pump water heater. They then go to the next step. They're now eligible for this new ELEC rate because of their heat pump water heater. And when they enroll in that, they're now saving about $20 a month compared to when they started. In time, they retrofit their furnace to a heat pump and save an additional money. So now they're about $30 a month ahead of where they originally started. And then we get to this fifth piece, and this is where something like TOU Super really plays a part, because it adds this extra element where the customer can go in and program their devices and change whatever it feels like is in their reasonable control in terms of behavioral usage. And they could save an extra $15 or $16 a month, so that they're getting almost $50 a month bill savings compared to when they started. And at that point, they're done. Their devices are programmed. They've retrofit them. They can get back to their life, but kind of reap the reward of lower energy bills into the future. Next slide, please. So finally, we'll kind of wrap this up and present our recommendation and open it up for some discussion. So really kind of the key takeaways is that we can do something new with this discount approach and really kind of try to carefully and strategically use it to encourage beneficial electrification. A flat discount, however, kind of does the opposite, since the more peak electricity you use, the bigger discount you get, versus the person who uses more off-peak actually gets a smaller discount. This feels to us like a low or no risk opportunity, since, like we said, it's very, very unlikely that a customer would get anything less than even a 1% discount by doing even the most kind of the TOU Super, even the most kind of ambitious design approach. And lastly, we feel like this is a great learning opportunity for us as we think about how we can use, how we as a CCA can really flex custom rates to support affordable, beneficial electrification in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so our recommendation, not surprisingly at this point, is that we're going to recommend or propose recommending to the board the ELX be updated to the TOU super design structure. But we'd really love your thoughts today on how you would feel supporting that. If you have other questions about what that could mean or what would make you comfortable with that. Secondly, are you okay with our recommendation to not include bill protection, given the very unlikely nature that any customer would lose on this kind of discount approach, and kind of our rationale that incorporating the administrative aspect of bill protection would cost more than it would really benefit. We feel like we could just staff could just internally review on a monthly basis to make sure that no customer was getting close to the point where they were losing money. So we could kind of handle that on our own. And then kind of the third point is, in the wake of BACMED zero NOx appliance rulemaking adoption, do we think about maybe guaranteeing this discount until at least Jan 1 of 2027 in support of BACMED's rulemaking, and kind of as a show of faith, and to help the BACMED staff report and kind of help us get us to that implementation? We feel that we have the budget and adoption to make a commitment like that if we choose to.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for taking our questions through the presentation, which I'm pretty sure would reduce the number of questions at this point. Do we have the Director of Energy Services, Adam Sullivan, giving comments? No. Okay, I just was seeing that here. Just wanted to confirm that we are not taking time away from. Okay.
I've always been first, but I'll hold back. But
Could
I'm
you
gonna-
put,
I'll be
could you,
back.
could you put this, the discussion topics up again, please? Last slide. Okay. So I'll answer succinctly from my perspective. I think we should recommend the TOU super design. So that's number one. Number two, to me, if we're only going to guarantee bill protection for 8 out of 240,000 customers, I would just keep it simple. Like, give away something that's nothing, right? 8 out of 240,000. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time on number two. Number three, that's more difficult, but I would say, let's do the discount for those people that sign up for it. But could we have new customers that sign up for this in like 2024? Are you saying that you want them to have protection as well? So that's kind of a comment and a question.
Yeah, good question. I think when we've talked about it, at least we've talked about what we had originally recommended. I guess I should mention this. We had originally recommended to the board that we maybe don't advertise a period of time. We funded this discount with the intent of it lasting multiple years, but because of some uncertainty in the adoption rate, we thought maybe we keep it simple and we don't guarantee that it's available for, say, 3 years or something like that. But maybe our thinking we're thinking that maybe we revisit that because of BACMED. And so I think what we're at least proposing here is that we say that this discount would be available until at least Jan 1 of 2027, and then after that until funds run out. And so if a customer signed up in the middle of next year, they could know that discount would be around until at least the start of 2027. We're not saying that if someone signed up on December 30th of 2026, we're not saying that we would guarantee it to them for 3 years after that. It would kind of, at that point, that would be at the until funds run out point where we're no longer making guarantees about how much longer it would last.
Okay, so my comment on number three is I think we should have a sunset or it should be for a finite period of time. It shouldn't be indefinite. And I think that from a family or a homeowner or a landlord making a decision, an investment decision, should I do this? Yes or no? Should I invest in this? They should have some certainty as to how long the financial numbers are going to be there. So that would be my recommendation. I'm sorry for jumping right in and going ahead of you there, George.
No, I want to be last.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I'm going to take a moment, take public comment right now very quickly so that we, as we are doing both questions and comments together, it'll be more efficient. Open the public comment period, Andrea.
And yes, we do have a member of the public, Bruce Carney, who would like to make a comment.
Bruce, good morning. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Your thoughts, please.
Good morning. So this is a very exciting proposal. And clearly there are two things that a rate structure like this could incentivize. One is for people who have a qualifying technology already, for example, an electric car, more likely than not, to modify the timing of the charging they do of their car. This is similar to what GridShift is already trying to accomplish. The other thing it can do is to incentivize people who do not have a qualifying technology to make a purchase decision to go out and get it. And of course, of the qualifying technologies, the ones that need the most help are building electrification, not EV adoption. In my zip code in Mountain View, last year, 34% of all new cars purchased in my zip code were electric vehicles. So, that's well past the chasm of death on the technology adoption life cycle. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if 2 years from now, it isn't 50% or more in Mountain View. And of course, it's not the same everywhere. So the concern, if there's a limitation on the number of customers that can be accommodated in this program, is to make sure the program is designed to incentivize people doing new stuff that they wouldn't have done already. And I'm not sure that there are any options easily on the table to do that without angering those who are even earlier adopters and they already have their heat pump water heater, they already have their EV. Two pieces of information I would love to see, and I think might help the board when this goes to them, are to compare the size of the price discounts and increases based on time with the actual cost of the electricity that SVCE is procuring in those hours of the day. My suspicion is that there's a higher degree of variability in the cost than is being passed along to the customer, which essentially means that there's subsidization that, in my opinion, shouldn't necessarily be occurring for those who use a lot of midday energy. And the other way to look at that is the carbon pollution as it varies across those hours of the day. So I'm generally supportive. I do think the guarantee to 2027 is very important, because if I'm looking at how much will my heat pump cost me to operate, I won't be basing that decision on a program that I know or believe is going to end a year or two from now. I want as much forecast certainty as I can possibly get. Thank you, Peter and board.
Thank you so much, Bruce. You always bring so much, so meaningfully, so succinctly every time for us to think over. I'll bring it. Any other public comment?
No additional public.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. With that, I close the public comment period and bring it back to the committee.
Thank you. So I think if we can get back up there, but I think I would go, I would go ahead and support at this time the super that you proposed. But I do think that there's, and a lot of it is not on SVCE, the world, we're doing our part. But I think we could take it a little bit farther. I mean, maybe we have an opportunity to propose some legislation that could help us with that. I'm looking at, the electric discount was established to support electrification by reducing on-bill impacts of replacing gas appliances. It is never going to happen for the 90% average, especially people who are renting. The landlords are not going to do it. So maybe, if we could do some type of where maybe if the customer were to commit to changing a stove or changing a water heater or changing their heat pump, that we could provide the savings they would get every month if they had that installed as a credit to their bill, right? For a commitment that they do that. Now, if that would mean that the stove or water heater or heat pump would need to be interchangeable, maybe it's something that they could take with them to the next house or somewhere where they move. I mean, this is the way that I think we have to think. If we really want to change, you're talking about, huge masses of people that you're never going to get to invest in this. It's not going to happen. So, I mean, these are the same conversations we're having, with ledge groups and everything else. So I'm just saying, down the road, I think, sure, now let's do the TOU super, but it's something that constantly sits in me that we've got to think this way if we really want to change things. Where, there's all these rules around water heaters and safety because they were gas. But if they're electric now, I mean, Sacramento, we've got to change that, right? So that you can just put in a water heater, take it out like you do with the refrigerator or you do with the washer and dryer, and take it to your next house when you move. And that's the way we need to start thinking if we really want to change things, I think.
Yes, Girish?
Reminded of a movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes. It's what it's going to take.
Yeah, and this is our decarbonization plan. It's actually related to what you said before in the previous item. What's going to happen in 12 years, right? Is inertia in the system, unlike things like telecom and software, which can be changed very fast. It just takes time to do it. And I can tell you, not only are we aligned with the goal that you're talking about, this is SVCE's mission and
Yes, I know.
what the board has allocated in terms of money for us. It's the state. So yes, on all of the above. So part of our tactics here are, how can we move this forward, right? So we expect maybe about 2,000 customers to take advantage of this. It gets back to the guarantee of savings also. We'll see what the uptake is, and maybe we'll expand it, but we need to see what this uptake is. We are also working on different rate programs. We are participating with PG&E on a real-time pricing pilot. Going back to the gas pruning discussion we had as part of the CEO report. Those are all part of strategies that we're going to be investing in for building decarbonization.
Yes.
Thank you, Girish. Always juggling so many pieces with constant evolution. That's kind of how I look at it. And when we were talking earlier about the technology shifts happening, constantly new news coming. And I tend to also read what the EU folks are doing because they are taking it, if I may say so, a little more aggressively and seriously. And so, George.
Let me start off with a question. The discount structure, as I understand it, excludes NEM people with solar. Is that true of these options too?
By definition.
Yeah.
All right, and I don't know
At
how,
this point in
at this
time,
point in time, okay,
because we are mirroring PG&E.
okay.
That's the way we price.
Uh-huh.
So PG&E is excluding them at this point in time.
Okay, I have to puzzle through that, but this is helpful to know. So now, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here, I think it's two different things. It's the push to get people to electrify, but it's also a push to shift load to improve the reliability of the grid. The biggest concern I hear from people saying, I don't want to electrify my house is, are you sure there's enough electricity?
I hear that all the time.
And this is a way to make that so. And a kind of an easy way. When I walk past my heater which I do several times a day, to see which way it's going. I can always tell if the dryer's on, okay? Because that's a 5 kilowatt thing right there. And so it's an automatic, it's like, I'm not running the dryer during that 4 to 9 p.m. because that's a big load. And so what I picture is just as recycling is not a financial thing, but it's a lifestyle shift. I feel like once you get people thinking about how to do these sorts of things, then it becomes ingrained, it becomes part of their way of doing things. I've learned this in safety. You can talk to people about the philosophy of safety and until you're blue in the face, but if you change their actions follow their thought process. Their thought process tends to match what their actions that you train. Long way of saying, yes, I support the super.
Yeah.
Yes, I support not including the bill protection. No, I don't think we should guarantee the discount because we're shifting people's behavior and it'll stay that way. And I don't know if that guarantee is so compelling to people's behavior shifts so much as my worry about the future market and how we don't want to guarantee any kind of discount that we may not be able to sustain if, say, energy prices collapse. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to add a comment to what you said here, George. Always very, very thoughtful that you have shared. The change in lifestyle, the incentives, not just from a financial perspective, but an awareness perspective. I think the timing is great. I was looking at my calendar. In April, we have Earth Day and so many cities are having events. That's the time with SVCE's presence there. If we talk about this, talk about shifting the load from the peak period to off-peak period, the benefit for residents, whether they are renters or homeowners, the benefits are there. There are certain limitations renters have, but even homeowners. In Saratoga, we have a lot of homeowners, but we have a lot of seniors. For them, the financial or the awareness incentive, it is difficult for them to shift to more electrification. However, the benefit of their understanding, being aware, and as well as the financial discount shifting to the super, what's the term?
TOU super.
TOU super, thank you. It makes perfect sense to me. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yes to the TOU super and yes to not include bill protection. The third one, even I have some concerns. Guaranteeing the discounts, we typically don't do that for anything else. I'll just put a thought out there, not fully processed in my mind either. But rather than guaranteeing a discount, why don't we incentivize upfront for the next X number of months, 12 months, 18 months or something? We want to incentivize to make the change happen rather than delaying it for 6 years. Do it now, you get some benefit. I don't know. Does it add up? Does it make sense? Or let's drop that idea.
Yeah, I think that will be part of our marketing and communications
Okay,
to encourage our customers to take advantage of an electric rate. So even those who don't need to change out their appliances, do it now since, take as much of the runway of this TOU super as you can. Let me put Peter on the spot for a second over here. Peter, on number 3, what's your thinking on guaranteeing the discount in terms of meeting our mission and what it would cost us? Because fundamentally, we have that $9.5 million, right? And if we're guaranteeing it and we have a giant uptake, we may blow through that $9.5 million. That's the policy issue on this guarantee. Right? If we're guaranteeing it, we may blow through it. So give me a sense of how much we could blow through that. I mean, that's the policy issue.
Yeah, good question. And we certainly hear about like rebate programs with this sugar crash problem, right? Where they offer too much and the uptake is really fast and they run out of money so quickly. So we've kind of looked at, what would it look like for linear adoption, so I can kind of speak to that. And we anticipate with the budget that we have approved that we could grow to about 20,000 customers, a little over 20,000 customers on this discount rate over a 5-year period, and make it through the end of that year 5 without running out of money. So I think we have a pretty safe cushion. I haven't necessarily looked at what a huge spike would look like in month 5 and how that would affect kind of the projection of the discount after that. I will say that in terms of BACMed, as we're talking about it, the staff report that is really going to make or break the 2027 implementation is due in 2025, and that's the time that BACMed staff will need to show that the adopted rulemakings will be feasible to implement, and so it's a lot shorter runway. And I feel confident we have the resources financially to make it through that period, but maybe there's less importance in guaranteeing, since that's a lot closer to where we are today than 2027. Maybe it's less important to guarantee a timeline. But also thinking through this, and don't have it fully baked yet either. But I appreciate hearing everyone's thoughts.
Girish and then Brian.
Just if this is of interest to the board now, we've assumed a linear adoption, means we'll have 4,000 or so, quite a few customers adopting it this year. It's quite unlikely, so we have enough money. And just chatting with Amrit, if the board is looking at maybe even, I think we can set aside some additional money too, just given the mid-year budget numbers that we provided you. If we want to guarantee it, I think we're trying to take advantage of the BACMed rule and what may come up now, right? So anyway, this is for discussion with the board. I'm just saying we could set aside more money. That's one option. The other is monitor this, see if there's a giant update. You can come back to the board and the rules of this program.
So my no on 3 is a soft no.
Okay, I've spent years on rate design because I'm all electric, and changing the rates moves the needle for me. Okay, and we won't even talk about NEM because I need a way to get off NEM. But let's continue. To follow up on a couple of points, I think on the third point, I think it's important to guarantee the discount to 2027. The more I think about it, because what's going to happen, and I think, Harish, you were alluding to this. If you're going to invest in something, the sooner you make that investment, the sooner you generate a rate of return. And if we're looking at in 2027, all of a sudden, you've got to do it anyways, right? On a replacement. So what I think will happen is the number of people will drop as you approach 2027 from a financial perspective. And when I always think from a financial perspective, not from let's save the planet, like align the objectives here. But so I think it'll decline. Getting to the point of spending $9.5 million and blowing through that immediately, gee, what a great thing. We're achieving our objective, which is reducing. So that's not a loss, that's a win, that's positive. So I would encourage you, George, to change your soft no to a hard yes on number 3. But the other thing is that we can also throttle this, and I think it'll be self-throttling if we say, okay, if you sign up for this rate today and you go through it, you are guaranteed to 2027. In 2025, if you sign up, we could eliminate that guarantee, right? Hey, the program, you know, and PG&E has done that multiple times to me. And then they change it after the fact, even worse. But anyways, we'll get.
That's something that we could design into the program, so at least the first tranche. So I think based on at least this feedback we've got so far, let me wait for hearing what Jordan.
No,
I have one,
think you're hearing.
I think I have one final point. Saying that you're gonna monitor this is absolute. Have to know how this is going so that we can amend it.
Sorry, see, I feel like, how much did we spend on September 6th last year? $12 million. And was it in 2022 or 2021 that we lost money? And so I just have a recollection of those. And if you're saying we've got it covered, we don't have to worry about those sorts of things, like I'm a child of the depression. Okay? And now I won't spend a nickel, but okay, I can back off on that as long as we have some guardrails.
Yeah, so I think the last idea that Brian put out, which is like, maybe we'll provide a guarantee for a period of time while we monitor. And I think from a marketing and outreach perspective, at least that first tranche of customers know that they're going to get it. We won't, yeah, so let us work with that. I think between now and the board meeting, there's enough to work with the sentiment expressed.
So we talk about the 12-month period, and monitoring is something we do in our city councils all the time. You pilot programs, whatever we call it. That's what we like to do. And then we have the sunset clause, which could be, okay, at the end of 12 months or whatever.
Right, and then Amrit's working on the stress test on our reserves and where this month.
Yeah, we'll keep monitoring how traction on this is, and if the traction is way too much, I'm always worried about that.
But
we can always suspend it, right? But that would be a good thing to have.
Yeah.
Celebrate it.
And I think my no is more, just, I think, yes, like I said, to the TOU super, and I think that does make sense to do. Mine is really just that so many people, I think, are being left out, not being able to change, to electrify and take advantage of that. Is there some way that we could do that?
Yeah, so I'll take that as a comment. So this becomes the everything, everywhere, all at once.
Correct.
And we'll bring that back to you about other programs and then even fine tuning these programs.
And the public outreach starting right away, which I know your team does a great job of, and timing is great.
So the capital E on everything.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. That's a fabulous discussion, and it's great to be meeting here in person, the executive committee meeting. It's taking longer, but very, very meaningful discussion.
Yeah,
and
no.
Looking at it from all perspectives, very beneficial. Thank you. Moving on to the last item for tonight, for this morning.
Tonight.
Yeah. I
Feels like tonight.
No. I was thinking of the board meeting, that what we are doing here is very beneficial for the board to go through all, and the staff to fine tune from so many angles, see everything everywhere all at once. So item number 7, before it's afternoon, I'm introducing it in the morning. Program snapshot, and we have Manager of Community Programs, Nupur Hirmats, and Senior Public Service Sector Services Manager, Tony Yulo.
Actually,
Where's Tony? Good morning, Tony.
hello. Actually, Nupur asked me to go ahead and introduce the item, since as Girish likes to say, I'm not shy. If Justin were here this month, he would remind the committee that this is the point in our agenda where we just spend 4 or 5 minutes briefing you on some of our activities, just to kind of put you in touch with some of the things that are going on in the background that aren't actually coming up for decisions anytime soon for you. So next slide, please. Our focus this month is on the actual things that we're doing that pretty directly influence and impact your agencies. So all of our 13 member agencies, and we've kind of divided them into 3 categories. One is direct grants to upgrade in your buildings, clean and resilient buildings. As you will recall, in 2020, The board authorized a $5 million expenditure in direct grants to our member agencies to make their buildings more resilient. The picture here is of the Milpitas facility that we contributed to. There's batteries attached to those solar panels so that that building has more operational bandwidth when the power is out. And then in two decisions, the board has authorized $3.6 million for electrification and engagement, particularly of community buildings. And so we are now with the grants, with the expansion that the board authorized in February, we have entered into grants with 9 different member agencies of our 13. So we got a lot of coverage there. Some really wonderful projects are coming along directly on your public facilities, as well as one school. If we move to the center, you'll see, if we can stay on that slide, Andrea, please. There we go. If we move to the center column, we're then looking at the things that we're doing to help work with your agencies to reduce friction in the area of electrification. So the board has authorized up to $3 million to be spent on modernizing permanent processes, another $1.9 million to do policy experimentation. You're well aware of our REACH code support, and you may or may not remember that we are providing technical assistance to 5 public agency fleets in our service territory to help them in planning for buying electric vehicles and installing the charging infrastructure on site. So this policy experimentation in particular is something we're really excited about. It's something that we're just kind of starting to really chew on hard and working with the agencies on what would it take to try something new. How can we support that? What funding is possible? How can we work together on trying some new experimental things that will move the needle on building and, for that matter, EV policy development? The last category, you'll see permit modernization twice, and that is because when we talk about our engagement and collaboration kind of in the trenches with your staff, permit modernization is really the poster child where we're looking at the processes that the agencies engage in and how can we work with the agencies in streamlining those processes. So perfect example is some agencies have 2 permits to do a heat pump water heater and some agencies have 1. So how can we get that to everyone has 1? And then also on the EV charging infrastructure front, the state has some pretty significant levers there and rules. And how can we support the agencies in modernizing the permitting process so that EV charging is fast and easy? We, of course, have our member agency working group that meets typically about 10 times a year. We just had our first in-person meeting since the pandemic yesterday. And that really is the time where there's a lot of give and take between the agency staff and SVCE staff. We talk to them about what's going on. They talk to us about what's going on, and we explore things together. SV Tech is our collaborative working group that we have that's sort of both with the public and private sector, specifically on EVs and electrifying transportation. And that meets periodically. And then lastly, we're looking at expanding our opportunities to assist member agencies in applying for grants, whether it's in getting people to apply for a common grant together, or we just had an opportunity this week to support one of our member agencies in applying for a state grant where we could serve as the co-applicant to help leverage our resources and make their application more competitive. With that, that wraps up my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tony.
Questions?
I don't have a question, I have a comment, and it's a compliment. And I'm not sure if this is at the right point in the agenda, but the emissions from 2-stroke engines are huge. And we had a city council member that said, let's ban 2-stroke engines because for lawnmowers, weed whackers, blowers, that sort of thing. Primarily because they're noisy, but he also said you basically eliminate all the benefits of an electric vehicle in a year by using a gas blower a couple of times or whatever. I can't remember the metrics. And he said there's incentives in place to move for folks to replace their gas powered equipment with battery operated equipment. And then no sooner did he say that than a week later or so, all of a sudden I got an email from SVCE talking about the very same thing. So that's my compliment. And I think that if you're dealing, and this gets to member agencies, that's a story that people don't understand at the city council level. And if you say, where's the leverage point? If you were to promote that at each city council that hasn't adopted leaf blower regulations, that would go a long ways to getting rid of greenhouse gas emissions that are harmful, noise, you know, and other things. I was not aware of it. You know, you can do all the right things for heat pump water heaters and everything else. But if you say, where do you start to move the needle? Electric vehicles move the needle, but if your 2-cycle engine eliminates that benefit, then where are you? You know, you get a lot of leverage, I think, out of those two. Anyways, you understand, that's my compliment and an opportunity for you. And I'm not sure if it's what goes to.
Thank you, Brian. I'll open the public comment, then we'll come back because it looks like we're in discussion. Public comment period, please, Andrew.
No hands raised.
Thank you. Close public comment period, and I think Eurisha's your thoughts.
So part of the reason to provide these updates to the executive committee is there's so much going on at the program side. And this is, you've approved strategies and money, but it doesn't come to you. So this is to provide it to you as awareness. So these kinds of, you know, this kind of feedback is very important in what you're seeing. I mean, that's a value add for CCAs, right? The local investment and being responsive to local needs. So this is amazing. We'll take it back. Obviously, Tony's our maestro over here, but we'll reach out. We have a marketing and outreach group too. We'll take that idea back and see how we can more on these programs with city councils, especially when it comes to these policy issues that other city councils may want to adopt. I'll just give some credit on this particular leaf blower idea. Board member Margaret Abikoga, one of the earliest people pushing this more than 2 years ago. She was really pushing this, and there's a very interesting story also behind that.
And it helps when one city is looking at changing their policy. Gradually, all 13 or 15. The larger family benefits. Thank you, Brian. Other thoughts? I guess it takes it back to, as you said, Girish, everything, everywhere, all at once. That's a beautiful way to, it's a beautiful way to put it, because I truly feel your team does so much from so many perspectives. You're constantly encouraging us, the board, the customers, whatever is possible for a certain subset of the population.
Yeah, if I may just say, you know, it's awesome to be part of this team. I also, just take a moment because it's our first meeting. I want to thank all the staff who put this together. There's all these logistics of people who set things up, whether it's our IT infrastructure, taking care of the board and employees to make sure that we have a comfortable space and make it very welcoming. There are lots of people behind the scenes that you can see them once you leave the office. So thank everyone for being.
And you know, if I could get a copy of Tony's slide, I feel like when we have kind of board member activities, it's at the end of our city council meetings. Everybody kind of wants to be done and all this.
Right.
And so in a way to make it a little easier, I don't talk about Silicon Valley clean energy nearly as much as I think I should. And so just having an easy vehicle and something to put in front of my fellow council members like that. And then you, every meeting, you always give us a board talking points. And I'm afraid I don't take advantage of that as much as I should.
I use it as my cheat sheet,
I
and
do
then I'll
too.
add other things
It
and.
looks like board member Tyson is the outlier here.
Again, once more.
Stop.
I think the professor
No, but-
retains a lot more in his.
Yes.
For me, by the
But
time
I
council
like the
meeting
idea
comes.
of the visual, because when you give your report, it's very, blah, blah.
But I'll take this, so we'll talk to our marketing outreach folks on this. I'll also say I want to give credit to Tony Yulo. Maybe about 4 years ago, he was still with Morgan Hill. He was the one who actually had this idea to provide information that can be utilized at city council meetings, so.
I'm shocked.
Idea. So, all right, will do.
Thank you, Tony.
And with that, I'll unmute and say I'm laughing even. So,
I guess Morgan Hill's lost and everybody else's game.
Yes, fine, we're still friends.
Okay, so that takes us to the last item, which is any committee member remarks overall, and then we'll take staff remarks.
We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, George. Staff remarks, Girish, your team.
Maybe just a heads up that we have the cities association meeting is, I believe, in June. There's a general meeting in
Yes.
June.
There is.
So as we look at the Backman rule and the impacts on cities and citizens, et cetera, we are working with Chair Abhikoga, Chair of the City Association, to contribute to that meeting. So we will of our action items. And
Thank you, everything prepared.
Yeah.
Really, that just proves how we are constantly all working together for overall common good in a way that works for all people as much as possible.
I will also say that next month in April 12th through the 14th, Cal Cities is having their legislative summit up in Sacramento. And so different divisions, the division and all the other divisions will be up there. Some of us with different hats, I'll be there with the Latino caucus as their legislative chair as well. So any bills or anything, that's a great opportunity. We'll be talking
we'd love to participate with you on that, as Director Makichik said, at the ad hoc ledge committee meeting, I believe next
Yep.
week.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to SVCE staff, the team. It's wonderful to be here in person. Thank you, committee members. With that, do you need a motion or I can just? Okay, I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 12:09 p.m.